but Halloween has been a time when there's always been a time of dress up, and either you're a hero or you're a villain or you're good or you're evil, and it's become very commercialized. And I think we've lost some of the significance of this day. And so what I'd like to do is start off giving a little bit of background. Halloween was rooted in our agricultural past. In the Celtic tradition, especially in Scotland and Ireland, it was called Samhain, which means end of summer. And interestingly enough, Samhain begins at sundown, like most festivals at sundown, and it begins and it is the beginning of winter, although it would be not fully cold, but it's the midpoint between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. And it's also the beginning of a new year. And so during Celtic times, the fire, which was important to the homes of people at that time, was extinguished to symbolize the end of the old year. And then the community would gather in the center and light bonfires and tell stories about the ancestors. And it was believed that there was a veil between the world of the dead and the world of the living, and that Samhain would be the time when that veil would begin to thin, and the people from the land of the dead could cross over into the land of the living, and therefore there would be opportunities to communicate with them. It also being a new year, it was also a time when people would do ritual practices to see, well, what would the new year bring? Not unlike what we do in our own new year. We have these little rituals that we enact to symbolize what the new year would bring, especially around love. That seemed to be very important at that time. And so one of the rituals that's probably familiar to some of you is bobbing for apples. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but it was believed that the first person to sink his or her teeth in an apple on that day would be married within the new year. In Ireland, there used to be this way of telling if you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you would have nuts, and you'd name each of the nuts by your boyfriend or girlfriend's name, and you'd put it on a grate and put it over a fire. And if the nut cracked or jumped, that lover was unfaithful. If the fire consumed was burning up, then that meant that you had problems on your hands and you had to figure out how to get rid of that person. But these practices occurred in community, and when it ended, everyone would take a piece of the fire from the bonfire back to their homes, and then the hearth would be ignited, and then hence the beginning of a new year. Years later, the Roman Catholic Church designated November 1st as All Saints' Day. It was originally called All Hallows' Day, which means to sanctify. But the day before November 1st, October 31st, was called All Hallows' Eve. Hence, it was condensed to Halloween. But it's a time of transition, a time to remember ancestors, and a time to honor the dead and those who've died. November 2nd was set aside as the All Souls' Day, or Day of the Dead, the custom of visiting graveyards and cleaning the graves, decorating them with flowers and candles. And this was quite popular in Mexico and parts of Latin America. And folks at that time would make what was called, I'm going to try to, a ofrenda, an altar, and set out a table with marigolds. And the marigolds were a way of inviting the deceased to come into the home, and you'd have pictures and candles and food to make sure that the spirits came in were at peace. But like many traditions, especially on the Day of the Dead, it suffered from a lot of reinterpretation. Roman Catholic missionaries who noticed how the indigenous people celebrated the Day of the Dead, likened it to All Saints' Day. And so they moved the celebration from what was originally a summer event to close to All Saints' Day. On a lesser known fact, it was also known to bear witness to the inequality of those who live in both life and death. It was all about connection. Zen master Gushan once told a student, I am an old monk. I, an old monk, will be reborn as a water buffalo in the front house of the temple 100 years hence, and 5 words will be on the buffalo's side. Monk Gushan, such and such. If you call this water buffalo Monk Gushan, is still a water buffalo. If you call it a water buffalo, it is still Monk Gushan, such and such. Tell me, what do you call it? How do you live a life of connection? Halloween is about ancestors. The Zen tradition is about ancestors. A life of connection that invites us to interact with our ancestors, both those who are living and those who are dead. I'd like to share a story with you. In May 4th of 2018, New York Times wrote an article. The writer was a man by the name of John Elvin. And the title of the story was, Their Ancestors Were on Opposite Sides of a Lynching. Now they're friends. The article tells the story about 2 women, one black woman, one white woman, and they find out from each other that the white woman's had an ancestor who lynched 4 black Americans. We're talking about 1918. The black woman found out that one of her ancestors was one of those who was lynched. And this story came together because the white woman found out that she was going to be a grandmother and that the grandchild was going to be biracial. And so it led to a lot of uncovering of facts that brought the 2 of them together, and the healing that it brought between the 2 of them. And so I put out there for us to consider, what have you inherited? What have you inherited? About 8 years ago, I took one of those DNA tests, and I learned that I was 63% sub-Saharan, 36% Western European, and then to sort of round it all out, Native American, both from North and South, with a little bit of Japanese and Northern Russian. When I've traveled to different parts of Europe, some places have been very familiar to me. I don't know why. I just know that I've been there before. I've had similar experiences when I hear music. I sort of know what the next thing is going to be. So these experiences are all about connection. Ancestors that are present right here, right now. And some of you may notice them. I mean, some of you may notice them in the mannerisms in which you speak, in which you act. Or sometimes you may notice them in the tone of your voice. Someone might remind you, you sound just like fill in the blank. Or the way you walk. You walk just like fill in the blank. So when you look in the mirror, who do you see? What about that homeless man or homeless person down the block or near you? Whom do you see when you do not recognize in yourself? I'll say that again. Whom do you see that you don't want to recognize as yourself? There may be people that you may want to disown, but you can't get rid of. Where are the ancestors right now? And what are you leaving as a spiritual inheritance?